You asked for a database just for the Senate, so here it is. Fair warning, this might just end up being a biography of Palpatine. That joke is more accurate than it should be. Palpatine used the Galactic Senate more completely than any political actor in galactic history, not just as a platform, but as the primary instrument of his own conquest. That part is settled. But here's what even deep lore fans tend to underestimate. The Senate was doing its own damage long before he finished the job. The institution was already compromised, already half-captured by corporate money, already paralyzed by factional gridlock, already structurally designed in a way that made what Palpatine didn't just possible, but almost inevitable. He didn't build a corrupt Senate. He inherited one, then pushed it off a cliff. Start with the building itself. The Senate met in the Senate Rotunda on Coruscant, in a chamber lined with 1,024 repulsorpods that could detach from the walls and float to the center of the room. Each pod held one delegation, the senator at the front, aides standing behind. The chamber represented worlds, sectors, star systems, and also corporations, guilds, and federations, all given formal voting representation equal to any planet in the Republic. That last category is where the structural argument begins. The Galactic Constitution invested the Senate with genuine authority, regulate trade, maintain hyperspace route maps, keep the Republic's military in being, mediate disputes, levy taxes, and declare war. The Supreme Chancellor, in peacetime, had a comparatively narrow mandate, primarily the prerogative to call extraordinary sessions. Anything beyond that required Senate approval. That arrangement was intentional, and it came from a specific historical decision. Around 1000 BBY, following centuries of Sith conflict, the Ruusan Reformation stripped significant power from the Chancellor's office and redistributed it to the Senate and regional governments. The Republic became more democratic. Its executive became structurally weaker. That design flaw sat quietly in the system for 1,000 years. The two dominant Senate factions in the final decades of the Old Republic were the core faction, advocating centralized power and higher taxes, determined to bring the Rim worlds into alignment with core standards, and the Rim faction, led by Senator Orn Free Taa of Ryloth, pushing for system autonomy and lower taxes. A smaller bloc called the Militarists generally voted with the core, but cared specifically about restoring a formal Republic army. Those three groups could rarely agree on anything substantial, and the commercial interests in the room knew exactly how to exploit that. In 124 BBY, the Senate declared the entire Outer Rim a free trade zone, exempting corporations from local taxation and giving them the legal argument for formal representation. The Trade Federation, founded around 232 BBY as a shipping consortium, built on that opening over the next century. By the Legends account, the Federation's official Senate seat was secured around 67 BBY through negotiations involving Darth Plagueis, operating under his public identity as the Moon Banker Hego Damask II. That's Legends, not canon, but the outcome is the same in both continuities. A corporation the size of a small government got a Senate pod with equal voting power to any planet in the Republic. The Intergalactic Banking Clan held a Senate seat too. The Commerce Guild did as well, represented in the pre-Clone Wars period by Shu Mai. The Trade Federation, Banking Clan, Commerce Guild, Techno Union, and Corporate Alliance collectively held enough Senate influence to shape legislation, and eventually all of them would sign on to Count Dooku's Separatist Council, while some continued maintaining a Republic Senate presence simultaneously. Lot Dodd sat in the Trade Federation's pod, Neimoidian, male, and described by Wikipedia as a manipulative being skilled at political maneuvering. He held that position from at least 33 BBY. His toolkit was procedural rather than forceful. Filibuster taxation debates indefinitely, request commissions rather than respond to crises, maintain formal neutrality while privately dealing with both sides of any conflict. When Queen Amidala came before the Senate during the Trade Federation's occupation of Naboo to appeal for relief, Dodd immediately requested a commission to verify her claims. not an emergency vote. A commission, which meant weeks of deliberation while Naboo stayed under military occupation. The official StarWars.com databank records his formal position years later. To hear Lot Dodd tell it, the actions of Newt Gunray didn't reflect the true intents of the Trade Federation, which remained loyal to the Galactic Republic. The Trade Federation's droid armies were, at that exact moment, fighting for the Confederacy. Corporate senators didn't need to break rules. They just needed the rules to be slow enough to be useless. The Wikipedia canon article states it plainly. The majority of the senators around the time of the invasion of Naboo became corrupt, changing their affiliations based on their own interests. That was the Senate before Palpatine completed his project. What he understood, what nobody else in that chamber understood, was that a compromised institution could be operated from the inside. He'd been doing exactly that since 52 BBY, when, in the Legends account, he took his first Senate seat representing Naboo after reportedly arranging the assassination of his predecessor, Senator Vidar Kim. His first 2 decades in the Senate were unremarkable by design. An obscure planet, a seemingly mild-mannered reformist, nothing that announced what was coming. His first visible power move required a crisis he'd helped direct. In 32 BBY, the Trade Federation, secretly taking orders from Darth Sidious, invaded Naboo. The Wikipedia canon article on the invasion states it plainly. Sidious had been the one who suggested Naboo be the Federation's target, as, in his guise as Naboo Senator Sheev Palpatine, he planned to use his people's suffering to his advantage. The Trade Federation had its own grievances. The Senate had just passed Resolution BR-0371, reimposing taxation on Outer Rim trade routes, which the Federation despised. The invasion had multiple causes. What Palpatine had was the ability to direct where that anger landed, then position himself to benefit from the chaos. When Queen Amidala arrived on Coruscant to appeal for relief, Palpatine was her advisor. He laid out 2 options: appeal to the Supreme Court, which he correctly noted was even slower than the Senate, or call a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership. Valorum's administration was already weakened, hampered by bureaucratic paralysis, by the Trade Federation's procedural obstruction, by unsubstantiated corruption rumors that Palpatine and his Senate ally had quietly cultivated. The StarWars.com description of the scene is precise. Palpatine demonstrates his political acumen and Machiavellian tendencies when he reveals the hidden workings of the Galactic Senate to Queen Amidala. She called the vote. The Senate erupted into immediate demands to vote. Valorum was removed. An election followed. Bail Antilles of Alderaan, Ainley Team of Malastare, and Sheev Palpatine of Naboo. Palpatine told Amidala before the results were in, "I feel confident our situation will create a strong sympathy vote for us. I will be Chancellor." He was right. A man who had orchestrated the invasion won the election that invasion created. Over the following decade, he kept extending his position. By the time of Attack of the Clones, he had fulfilled 2 full terms, but the Senate voted to extend his chancellorship beyond the constitutional limit in response to the Separatist crisis. The institution voluntarily suspended its own checks on the man who was dismantling it. Now for the figure inside the Senate doing the mechanical work. Mas Amedda was a Chagrian from Champala, 1.96 meters tall, and for the purposes of this story, more important than any senator in the chamber except Palpatine himself. His official title was Vice Chair, also called Vice Chairman or Senate Speaker, the presiding officer responsible for maintaining order and controlling the flow of debate. The StarWars.com databank states his role without ambiguity. Amida was one of the few in the galaxy who knew Palpatine was a Sith Lord, and assisted the Chancellor as Speaker of the Senate, helping him manipulate senators into granting him more and more power. He knew, he chose, and he was exceptionally good at it. In Legends, Amida had originally been installed in his position by Senator Orn Free Taa and the Rim faction, hoping to use him as a procedural weapon against Valorum. They put him in office to be a tool and watched him find his own agenda entirely. When Palpatine confided his Sith identity to Amida, the vice chair was already committed to the project. His loyalty was rewarded. Amida became Grand Vizier of the Galactic Empire and remained at Palpatine's side for the next 2 decades. His single most consequential Senate maneuver happened in 22 BBY. The Military Creation Act, the bill authorizing an army for the Republic, had been deadlocked for 2 years. Padme Amidala led the opposition and held the numbers. The Senate couldn't authorize an army. So Amida and Palpatine didn't ask the Senate for one. Jar Jar Binks held the title of Junior Representative for Naboo, a position that could voice minority opinions but couldn't normally vote or introduce legislation. The exception was if the seated senator was unavailable, in which case the junior representative could act in their place. Padme had been removed to Naboo under Jedi protection following an assassination attempt. Jar Jar was her proxy. Amida then suggested to Jar Jar that Padme herself would have made an emergency powers proposal if she were present. Jar Jar, on the Senate floor, said, "In response to this direct threat to the Republic, Misa proposed that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor." The motion passed. The Emergency Powers Act allowed Palpatine to bypass the Military Creation Act entirely and activate the clone army waiting on Kamino. 2 years of Senate debate, 7,000 activists outside the Rotunda, dozens of senators switching positions on the Military Creation Act, all rendered irrelevant by one manipulated proxy. An absolute mad lad move, executed through the most boring procedural mechanism imaginable. The motion contained the seeds of its own abuse. The official Senate decree stated, "The Supreme Chancellor shall relinquish these powers in good faith once the current separatist crisis has abated." He never did. 4 more constitutional amendments followed over 3 years of the Clone Wars. 1, the Reflex Amendment, granted near absolute power over military affairs, almost completely bypassing the Senate in practice. Palpatine became, constitutionally, more powerful than any chancellor since before the Ruusan Reformation. The anti-war faction fought every step of this in real time. During the Clone Wars, the Senate had fractured into 3 recognizable blocks: Loyalists and Hawks, pro-Palpatine and pro-war, pushing military buildup; the pacifist bloc, including Padme, Bail Organa, and Onaconda Farr of Rhodia, working to stall military spending and open diplomatic channels; and a neutralist corporate bloc quietly dealing with both sides. Padme collaborated directly with separatist Senator Mina Bonteri, who had previously served in the Republic Senate before defecting, to draft a peace initiative in 21 BBY. The proposal passed the separatist parliament with a vocal majority. Dooku had Bonteri murdered and staged an attack on Coruscant to ensure the Republic Senate rejected it. Even on the separatist side, the Senate was a fiction maintained for appearances. The separatist parliament on Raxus Secundus operated under the bylaws of independent systems, headed by Speaker Beck Lewis, and was theoretically free of the procedural gridlock that strangled the Republic Senate. In practice, Dooku held emergency wartime powers and ignored the parliament whenever it became inconvenient. When Lewis objected to Dooku's forced annexation of Scipio to seize banking clan assets, Dooku had him killed on the spot. Both sides of the Clone Wars ran the same Senate, an executive who used it as legitimacy theater until legitimacy was no longer useful. The delegation of 2000 was the Republic Senate's last attempt at legitimate resistance. Named signatories included Bail Organa of Alderaan, Mon Mothma of Chandrila, Padme Amidala, Mina Tills of Mon Cala, and Fang Zar of the Cern sector, roughly 2,000 senators total, formally presenting Palpatine with 3 specific demands: relinquish the emergency war powers, abolish the sector governance decree, and begin ceasefire negotiations. The petition was delivered at the final full Senate session before the war's end. One day after Palpatine declared the Empire, 63 senators were arrested on charges of treason. Most had signed the petition. The senators who pushed back hardest paid the highest prices. Bail Organa of Alderaan began representing his world in the Senate around 32 BBY, building his reputation through alliances with Mon Mothma, Onaconda Farr, and Padme Amidala. He served on Palpatine's own loyalist committee while working against Palpatine's power accumulation simultaneously, a position of extraordinary political danger held for over a decade. He watched the declaration of the new order from inside the Senate chamber. Then he financed the rebellion, adopted Padme's daughter Leia, and spent the next 19 years using his formal Imperial Senate cover to fund and coordinate resistance operations. He died when Alderaan was destroyed by the Death Star in 0 BBY. Onaconda Farr of Rhodia worked the Senate floor with Organa and Padme throughout the Clone Wars. He was murdered for it. Another Rhodian senator, Lolo Purse, poisoned him at a celebration following one of the anti-war faction's funding victories. She believed Farr had betrayed Rhodia by opposing the war effort. The Senate lost one of its most active resistance voices to an internal assassination before the delegation of 2000 ever delivered their petition. Rio Chuchi of Pantora represents what the Senate was actually designed to accomplish, on the rare occasions it managed it. During a territorial dispute over Orto Plutonia, Pantoran chairman Papanoida wanted to claim the ice world as Pantoran territory. Chuchi used her Senate authority to recognize Tal's sovereignty instead, against the explicit wishes of her own planetary leadership. A senator representing the moral weight of a situation, rather than the immediate political interest of her home government. The institution was capable of that. It just rarely chose to be. Mon Mothma of Chandrila was the most dangerous political actor Palpatine never managed to neutralize in time. She was exceptional at marshalling Senate votes and building formal consensus, right up until formal consensus became impossible. In 2 BBY, following the Gorman massacre, she delivered a speech from the floor of the Imperial Senate directly against the Emperor. The Andor Season 2 recording preserves her words. "I stand this morning with a difficult message. I believe we are in crisis. The distance between what is said and what is known to be true has become an abyss." Then she resigned and fled. She formalized the Rebel Alliance through the declaration of the Rebel Alliance, and later, as the New Republic's first Chancellor, made the decisions that would define the galaxy's next political failure. Now run the comparison forward through all 3 iterations. The Imperial Senate inherited the same membership and structure as the Galactic Senate, with dramatically reduced authority. It handled administrative minutiae, while Palpatine made every actual decision. His own words, recorded in a Darth Vader comic. "I have allowed a convenient fiction to persist, that the Empire is merely a continuation of the Republic. The Imperial Senate remains, an illusion of many voices coming together to govern. In truth, there is only one voice. Mine." He'd planned to dissolve it from the moment he declared himself Emperor, needing the institutional shell for legitimacy while the Death Star was under construction. Regional governors absorbed real power progressively. The senators who had opposed the new order, Organa, Mothma, grew more and more vocal and were considered a major concern for the regime. When the Death Star became operational in 1 BBY, the Senate's usefulness as a prop ended. Grand Moff Tarkin delivered the announcement to the Joint Chiefs. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away. The New Republic Senate tried to learn from every prior failure and overcorrected on every axis. Mon Mothma pushed the Military Demilitarization Act, reducing military forces by approximately 90%, and deliberately stripped executive military authority from the Chancellor, transferring it to the Senate collectively. She called the old emergency powers a poison to democracy and moved to eliminate them immediately, a historically justified instinct that created a structurally incapacitated government. By 28 ABY, documented in Claudia Gray's novel Bloodline, the Senate had fractured into 2 irreconcilable factions: the populists, favoring planetary autonomy, the centrists, favoring stronger central authority. Neither could enforce financial regulations. Neither could coordinate against criminal networks that were, as it turned out, funding the First Order's navy. Senator Ransom Wartall, a centrist, conspired with Black Sun and Red Key syndicates to coerce 5 senators into opposing a military deployment bill, because even the galaxy's third democracy had senators working against it from the inside. When a covert First Order agent revealed Leia Organa's parentage and destroyed her Senate standing, the last credible voice for military preparedness lost her platform. The New Republic rotated its capital between worlds to signal that no single planet would dominate. The practical effect was that Starkiller Base could destroy the Senate and capital at Hosnian Prime simultaneously in 34 ABY, because there was no fleet in position to stop it. 3 Senates, 3 structural collapses. The Old Republic, corporate capture, constitutional suspension, emergency powers used as an escalation ladder, rung by rung, over 30 years. The Imperial Senate, no real power, a legitimacy prop dissolved when a better enforcement mechanism became available. The New Republic, structural demilitarization, factional paralysis, and a threat it refused to acknowledge through legitimate channels until the planet was gone. The people who saw it coming are the Senate's real story. The delegation of 2,000 who signed a petition knowing it would accomplish nothing and signed it anyway. Bail Organa voting his conscience from inside the advisory committee of the man he knew was his enemy. Mon Mothma delivering her speech into the record at the exact moment it would cost her everything. Padme Amidala naming what she was watching in real time. So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. Democracies rarely fall to conquest. They fall to procedure, to commissions that delay instead of respond, to term limits suspended just this once, to emergency powers that were supposed to expire in good faith, to corporate voices holding equal votes with planets, to 2,000 senators who saw exactly what was happening and couldn't stop it through the tools the institution provided. The Galactic Senate is the most detailed fictional map of that process ever put on screen. We've barely touched the full Clone Wars anti-war senator roster, the species-based political blocks that shaped voting patterns across 3 eras, or the banking clan's quiet survival through every regime change in galactic history. That's a different volume. Subscribe if you want to be there when it drops.